All right, so the whole intent of today's training is to update you on southern pine beetle, how it occurred here, the life history, what is occurring on Long Island as it relates to southern pine beetle, how it arrived, and what management activities are being advanced under the leadership of the DEC in order to suppress this devastating beetle, and then how you can be involved as far as helping with the inventorying of the infestations so that we can cooperatively work with the DEC to effectively implement suppression activities in a rapid way that will suppress the southern pine beetle populations. Nate and Brian, I'll talk a little bit about some of the changes this year related to southern pine beetle monitoring and management due to some budget restrictions. And the commission has been supportive of the work that the DEC has been doing, and we continue to be so, especially in hosting these trainings and presentations as partners. And so in that accord, we wanted to start off the training with a little bit of the natural history and impact on southern pine beetle. The picture here that I have in my opening slide is of the infestation that's in East Quogue. It doesn't unfortunately look like this anymore. It looks like dead standing pines that you see are orange are now dead standing pines since the southern pine beetle blew through this area in 2016. So a little life history on southern pine beetle is that this beetle is native to the southern pine forests. You can see here the native range of the southern pine beetle. It's a very interesting beetle in that not only does it occur in the southern United States, but it also occurs into Mexico and into Central America, where it is equally devastating. The difference between what we have here, excuse me, what we have going on in Long Island and the northern regions as it moves and spreads is that it's moving into non-native habitats where, I would say it's moving into habitats, native habitats, where it is not native. So those forested regions are not used to having this pest, and that's part of the reason why it's been so devastating. This preferred species, unfortunately for us, and why we're seeing it spread so rapidly, is the pitch pine. It also will infest white pines, especially in highly active areas, black pines, and Norway spruce. So in areas where, as you can see in this picture with the two interns that we had in 2016, those are smaller pines. That was an area of active infestation. And the beetles, are overabundant and hungry, and so they are attacking all size classes of trees and causing mass devastation. So when you see it moving into white pine, black pine, or Norway spruce, it tends to be in areas where there's not a high abundance of pitch pine and it's looking for a host tree. It may not be necessarily its preferred species, but it has the will to survive and reproduce, and so it uses those other alternative host species. The mode of action and how this beetle is able to communicate with one another and reproduce is through mass attack. So it has pheromones that it releases that draws the insects to one another, where they mass attack in what we call spots. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. They are bark beetles. They burrow into the bark of the tree, infest the vascular system. Unfortunately, when you have mass attack up of 5,000 beetles per tree, that massively disables the vascular system and limits the ability for the tree to tap into both food and water resources that it needs. And so when you see the browning or the bronzing of the needles, that's due to the lack of ability to move water resources up the tree. And if it does have a low infestation of southern pine beetle where it doesn't disrupt the vascular system, it introduces what's called the blue stain fungus. It's an antagonistic fungus that they carry with them on their bodies. They're effectively inoculated with that fungus, and they introduce it into the tree and the blue stain fungus will actually clog the vascular system. So the infestation of southern pine beetle, whether it is a mass attack or not, tends to be the nail in the coffin as far as those trees are concerned. What we see as far as mortality and hazard tree development on Long Island is mass die-off, which is an important consideration when we talk about alternate or similar species to southern pine beetle. And it also, especially in the summer months, we can see that mass die-off within 6 weeks of the trees, and as the cooler weather sets in, upwards of 4 months. So it's a very effective insect in disrupting the vascular system of these trees. And my slide won't advance. Okay. So what does this little insect look like? Generally, when we do this training, we actually have some dead specimens that we pass around, but that's kind of hard to do in a webinar. So this gives you an idea of how small this little black beetle is. It's 1 to 3 millimeters long. And you can see there's a nice picture of scale there with the thumbnails of a southern pine beetle trapped in the pitch tube that the tree is exuding, and that the southern pine beetle actually pulls out of the pitch tube in order to keep active access and air into the vascular system. How you can really differentiate the southern pine beetle pitch tubes from the turpentine beetle is that these pitch tubes are small. They literally can look like a size of a piece of popped popcorn. They can be white, they can be clear depending on when the beetle has infested the tree. They become, darker and more opaque as the pitch tubes become older. And there'll be a number of pitch tubes along the bole of the tree as long as the tree has the water resources in which to produce pitch. So if we're in a drought condition, sometimes you don't see those pitch tubes. Having beetles entrapped in the pitch is, makes it much easier to identify whether it's a southern pine beetle or not. And then you may also see very small red frass, which is the excrement of the beetle when it eats the tree material. So lookalike species is the turpentine beetle. It's much larger. You can see, I don't know if you can see my pointer on the screen or not here, but this is the turpentine beetle. This is a grain of rice, and then this is the southern pine beetle. So it really gives you a sense of scale of how small the southern pine beetle is. But the turpentine beetle is its native cousin. They're both in Dendrocynus genera, different species. And the turpentine beetle produces a much larger boring hole just by the scale, the difference in scale of size of the turpentine beetle. And so when it bores into the tree, it produces a much larger hole. And so the tree, in responding to push the beetle out through the production of pitch, creates these much larger pitch tubes that what I like to call can result in almost like pitch waterfalls and drizzles that you see coming down the bole of the tree.
Yeah.
Don, we're not, mute your phone. So the pitch tubes are much larger, they're runnier, they're dark in color, and they tend to also be isolated to the lower 6 feet of the tree. And that's a little bit of niche differentiation that you see between the southern pine beetle and turpentine beetle, is that the turpentine beetles tend to be in that lower 6 feet, where the southern pine beetle will infest the entire length of the bole of the tree. Also, the turpentine beetles can kill a tree, but you tend to see it to be infested in only 1 or 2 trees in the vicinity, and if it does result in mortality, it's usually those 1 or 2 trees, not the mass number of trees that we see with southern pine beetle. And if you are out scouting, what we really encourage you to undertake is to look at trees that are infested with turpentine beetle, because the injury caused by that turpentine beetle tends to draw in southern pine beetle. So you can have a turpentine infested tree also be infested with southern pine beetle just because of the injury that's created by the turpentine beetle. So the southern pine beetle is not only drawn to the pheromones, but it's also drawn to the scent of tree injury that's released associated with the sap. So there's other lookalikes that you may see as far as injury on trees, and there's also some slight niche differentiation as far as where you might commonly find them infesting a tree. I use this loosely as this is science, but so the engraver or Ips beetles tend to be found in the top half of a tree. And it's really hard. You're not going to be able to differentiate these species necessarily by eye unless you have experience looking under the microscope at them. It does give you some characteristics as far as the hind end of the beetle and some of the differentiations there. But one of the easier ways to differentiate them if you do have access to some of the bark is to look at the galleries that are created. And I find these very interesting as far as the unique patterns that each of the insects create. So these are more of the galleries of the Ips beetles here, and you can see how different they are. The southern pine beetle has a very distinct, this is not very clear, but very distinct S patterns, which I associate S as southern pine beetle, and then the black turpentine beetle would be lower, and it's very hard to see. Oops. It's very hard to see this pattern, but hopefully we'll get to see that in the field when we go out in the field. So the pitch pine, if you're out in the field surveying for southern pine beetle and its preferred species, it's good to know what the pitch pine, some identifying characteristics of the pitch pine are. So the needles on the pitch pine tend to be moderately long, between 2.5 inches to 5 inches long. But some of the identifying and unique features is that it has 3 needles per fascicle, and the needles tend to be slightly twisted in that. You also have these cones, which can be either open or serotinous, and trees with the serotiny means that the cones stay closed like this until a fire comes through and burns off the waxy cuticle and then opens the cones. The cones also have very sharp points along the edge of each of the segments of the pine cone. So if you were to grab a hold of that, you would release it very quickly. As far as the trunk of the tree, the pitch pine has these very distinct chips or bark plate that are very thick and scaly. You can pull them away. They also tend to be very dark brown in color, and sometimes even red if you were to pull the bark plate away. And it is adapted to fire, and because of that, what you may see is that when the tree becomes injured, whether it's through fire or southern pine beetle injury, is it has these epicormic buds within the trunk of the tree, and it responds to the injury, whether it's the incineration of needles or the disruption of the vascular system, by trying to push new vegetative growth through this epicormic budding. Unfortunately, with southern pine beetle, because the vascular system's disrupted, it's the last bit of energy that the tree is able to muster, but generally will not help the tree because the vascular system's disrupted. If this was a fire, then it would push new branches and new needles out of these epicormic buds. If you were to do a cross-section of this tree, you would see really how nice and thick this bark is. And we believe that's one of the reasons why the southern pine beetle prefers the species, not only the abundance of pitch and resources, but the insulation factor that it's provided over the winter due to the thick bark plates. So another iconic feature of pines especially is that they self-prune. So as they mature, they lose their branches from the base. And that's also a protective measure against fire being drawn up into the crown. So white pine, which we don't have as abundantly on Long Island, but we do have in certain areas. And we have found that it is can be infested by pitch pine, just not as frequently, is a similar species, different, or similar genus, different species. How you can differentiate the two is that the needles are much longer and thinner. They're 3 inches to 5 inches long. And if you look in the fascicles, there's 5 of those thin, slender needles per fascicle. The bark tends to be much thinner than the pitch pine. It doesn't have the scaly plates as the pitch pine does. You can literally run your hand over the bark of the tree, and it tends to be very smooth. It can produce a bit more of a white, drizzly pitch than the pitch pine, and it can be a much larger tree than a pitch pine will grow at maturity. So it can grow upwards of 100 feet, and it also will lose its branches as it matures. So how the southern pine beetle infests and how it expands is that the females initiate the attacks. They find the suitable host tree. It tends to be a tree, and this is data that was collected by DEC. It tends to be a tree that is at least 4 inches in diameter, is when the tree becomes susceptible and is preferred. Although it will mass attack trees up to as small as 2-inch DBH, as shown here in East Quogue. But the average size tree that the southern pine beetle prefers is on average about 14.5 inches DBH, 59 feet tall, and 100 years old. So the beetle does like the older trees, and once it infests, it burrows into those trees and is successfully able to reproduce. It releases the pheromones that then attract other beetles to the tree. So it's a combination of the pheromone and the injury from mass boring that are the chemical indicators that draw the beetles in. What I find is really interesting is that when there are too many beetles or enough beetles at one tree, they actually send out an alternate indicator to everyone that effectively the hotel is full and you need to move on to a different tree. We're not accepting any more guests. So they do their reproduction and they're able to reproduce multiple broods per year, which results in their exponential growth. In the spring, what you'll see in the growth curve that we've been monitoring is that you have coalescence. So the beetles will overwinter in the tree as well as the broods, and then they both emerge at the same time. So you have a spring flush of both adults and overwintering now mature first-year individuals that move on and infest adjacent trees or pheromone plumes, allowing them to move in greater areas where they can mature in a month in the summer or upwards of 2 months as the colder weather sets in. And their activity really increases at 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So as I mentioned before, the mortality of the pitch pine occurs in 6 weeks to 4 months, depending on the temperature. And what's really important to getting out and doing early detection and monitoring and suppression is that for each tree that is infested, it has the ability to produce enough insects of a next generation to develop and infest 10 additional new trees. So this is where suppression is critically key in an urban environment and in the forested environment to reduce the development of hazard trees and suppress the population so we don't continue to lose pitch pine out of our forested stands. So local impact, and what we're seeing is that in New Jersey, the southern pine beetle actually moved from the south to the north in 2002, and they detected their first outbreak then in 2002. And they had over 50,000 acres that were affected. That number's probably increased since I first got this statistic. 2010 was their worst year with 14,000 acres affected in a single season. To give you an idea of how big that is that our outbreak started in 2014. That's when we first discovered it. So the beetle was actually here earlier. If you know anything about invasive species curves, is that, you know, an insect or a disease or or any invasive species, or even the coronavirus, it takes a certain amount of infestation and before it becomes before we become aware of that it's an issue. And so we detected this insect in 2014 in Hampton Bays, Connecticut, Shirley, and MASDEC. It was Cornell Cooperative Extension, DEC, and Fish and Wildlife, and New York State Parks that all consecutively identified that they had southern pine beetle. Our current level infestation across Long Island, and Nate or Brian, correct me if I have this inaccurate, is over 7,000 acres. So if you look at the worst case scenario for New Jersey, they had an outbreak in one season of 7,000 acres or 14,000 acres. So, so the outbreak in the north is real and it's devastating, and it continues to impact both New Jersey and Long Island. The current extent is all the way out on the east end in East Hampton and Southampton, Hampton Bays, along the South Fork in the Pine Barrens at East Quogue, Brookhaven, Shirley. It's extended out into Islip in the urban areas. I know it's out in Brentwood, and has extended into Nassau County as well as up Rocky Point and the North Shore, some of the North Shore points as well. Active monitoring is occurring in the Catskills in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island in similar pine barren ecosystems due to the concern of mass devastation. I know there was an outbreak in Connecticut, but I'm not quite sure if they've had any additional infestations. So this just gives you an idea of where the mapping or the monitoring is occurring. This was in 2016, so this map is a little old, but I expect that the monitoring is still accurately occurring here. All the way up from Plattsburgh down through the Albany Pine Bush and the Rome Pine Sand Plains and the Taconic Parkway, the Gunks, and the Hudson Valley. And then this shows here, this is the map of the monitoring that's occurring both in New York State, New Jersey, and then in the Northeast. So I believe that the only detections that have occurred southern pine beetle in New York State, other than Long Island, were trap detections in the Albany Pine Bush and the Gunks, but no active infestations found as of yet. So the local impact continued when we talk about southern pine beetle is, I mentioned already, the preferred demographics of preferring 100-year-old trees that are, relatively large size in DBH and height. When a tree becomes susceptible at 4 inches diameter, what we're seeing is that because the trees are being affected when that we currently have on the landscape when they're older, and then the trees also become susceptible at 4 inches of diameter, approximately 29 years old, is that we're at risk with the southern pine beetle infestation taking out the older trees, those heritage trees, but also impacting those trees starting at age 29 means that we may lose majority of those heritage trees, and we may not be able to sustain these large heritage trees on the landscape over time. The trees would not continue to be able to mature past 4 to 5 inches in diameter if southern pine beetle continues to persist here in areas where we have massive outbreaks. So this just gives you an idea of an area infestation in Quogue. You can see the dead pitch pines that occurred in 2016. The area in red is actually the area that is further been mapped and was identified as having southern pine beetle. So all of this area would now be gray as well with dead standing pines, and it's probably expanded beyond there as well. So when we go back to that impact and we look at the scale is, I talked about already the loss of the dominant and codominant species. When you lose, pitch pine, which is a dominant pine stand in these pitch pine forests, or we lose the codominant pines in the oak forest, what you get is an accelerated rate of succession or the loss of the dominant species and the change in forest community and structure. We're at risk of losing our old growth pines. And then that just general acceleration of oak dominance causes the mesification of the pine barrens. and the loss of that xeric landscape and all the species that are dependent on it. There's also the increase in hazards from the dead standing trees. So from a recreation perspective or homeowner's perspective or business perspective of having, increased hazards of these trees that decay much more rapidly than trees that naturally die on their own due to a lightning strike or any other general mortality. You find that infected trees with southern pine beetle, they tend to break from the top and fall very rapidly in a span of time than the natural mortality trees. And then there's also the risk for altered fire behavior and hazard, where you have a high amount of fuels that are occurring in the landscape. From an urban landscape, similar challenges is that you have the hazard tree development that occurs at $1,000 per tree to remove. It's not only a hazard environment, but it's also an economically stressful environment to remove just one tree, let alone a mass number of pines that could risk your home or your infrastructure, your family. There's many issues associated with urban landscapes and the loss of pitch pine trees from that landscape. And then there's also, the inherent value of these trees in an urban landscape and the benefits that they provide that are lost when pitch pine mortality occurs due to southern pine beetle. So southern pine beetle, unfortunately, is here to stay. It's much too abundant for eradication. And so we are working in concert with the DEC to advocate suppression in the central pine barrens and across Long Island. And I'm gonna hand it over to Bryan. He's gonna introduce the work that DEC's been doing and the management there related to southern pine beetle and the current state of affairs of southern pine beetle on Long Island.
My name is Bryan Ellis. I'm the program coordinator for the Southern Pine Beetle response statewide out of New York and DEC. I work in Albany, and our team consists of, right now, we're running a pretty small team. Nate is our incident commander, who runs our SPB response, and Chris Steigerwald, who's going to talk later, is works down Long Island, is our on-the-ground technician. So I'm just going to go over just the status update on where SPB is in Long Island, what kind of damage it's done, DEC's response. Nate, if you want to advance the slide one, that'd be great. Okay. So I'll just gloss over this real quickly because Polly hit it. SPB, it's native to southern United States. We've been seeing it in Long Island since 2014 and 15, and DEC has had a pretty robust response to this to try to preserve the Pine Barrens ecological community in Long Island. Nate, next slide. Okay, and you guys all saw this during Polly's presentation, but this is the extent, the range of southern pine beetle, and we're seeing it, move into Long Island, New Jersey, Connecticut, and we've had some detections, as we talked about, in the Hudson Valley, but no current infestations. This is definitely due to climate change, warming of temperatures, and stress drought conditions that are making these trees more susceptible to southern pine beetle attacks. And it's just part of this effort to prioritize our efforts with managing southern pine beetle. We created this susceptibility map looking at where host species are, and then a range of things, including size, density of southern pine beetle trees, and things like that. And as you see, most of this, it goes from green to red, as most low susceptibility to high susceptibility. As you see, that core Pine Barrens area, which is the most intact ecosystem for pitch pine and Pine Barrens in Long Island, is right in the middle of the island where Nate is circling with his cursor right now, and that's where we're seeing the most susceptible areas. And those areas, as you go through this presentation, here are areas that we've been finding southern pine beetle, and where we've been actively suppressing it, as aggressively as possible to try to protect these communities and limit the spread of southern pine beetle throughout the Pine Barren area. All right, Nate. So we kind of saw this earlier, I think, but this is where we've been seeing where we see detections from traps, and as you see, we've had detections upstate of Long Island. Currently, we have had no infestations, but we have found beetles and traps. Southern pine beetle is a good disperser. They often use wind currents, strong winds, to travel distances. So this last year, we did find quite a few southern pine beetle in the lower Hudson Valley and Bear Mountain State Park, and some of the surrounding parks in that area. We have planned to do some increased surveys in that area to look for SPB, but we have not currently found any active infestations in those areas. But we're actively monitoring it and looking for it so we can catch it early and not, and try to limit the spread of that pest into those communities. All right, Nate. All right, so here's just a map of our aerial polygons. So every year we do a couple flights of Long Island to prioritize our survey efforts, and this is an example of what one of those looks like. Chris is going to talk more in depth, or Chris and Nate are going to talk more in depth about this later on in our presentation, but I want to just show everyone kind of what our process looks like. And so as we fly over the island, we will map the damage from light to very severe, and then we will prioritize going out and doing ground surveys in those areas to confirm if that damage is southern pine beetle related, turpentine beetle related, or some other damage causing agent. So Nate, if you go to the next slide, we do these flights at least twice each year in January and in August, and we've been doing them since 2015. The methods that we've used to do them have changed slightly throughout the time that we've been doing these surveys. And, in 2017, we changed to doing this very light to very severe categorization of the damage. And that helps us understand, how dense those populations are in those areas. And what I want to talk about today is just the trends of southern pine beetle damage in Long Island since we've been working there. And as you see in 2017, we had some in that moderate, severe, and very severe category. In 2018, the damage is reduced in acreage, but we still had quite a bit in that moderate, severe, and very severe. And then in 2019, there was a slight drop again in the acreage, but we're now moving into the more light and very light infestations and having much less of the moderate to severe polygons. So we're seeing lighter infestations on the landscape, and that's because these large populations are getting controlled, and we're not seeing that, vast damage, but we're still seeing the 1s and 2s and small pop-ups of southern pine beetle, which, we're able to get out on the landscape, suppress those areas, and try to control those populations. So here we're showing you a map of where we did suppression in 2019. And as you see, and if you can think back to that susceptibility map, a lot of those areas, Sears Bellows State Park, Robert Cushman Murphy, South Haven, those are all spots that had, that red, very susceptible, and that's where we ended up doing most of our suppression this year. Those blue dots are SPB not found, and most of those were turpentine beetles found. So from the air, it's very difficult to tell the difference between these two insects, as they just cause discoloration in pines. And so we really have to get out on the ground to do the surveys to really understand what's causing this damage. Nate, if you want to jump to the next slide. So this is, another trend that we've been seeing. So we've been actively in DEC, we've cut over 20,000 trees since 2015 to suppress active trend here is a decrease in the trees cut, and from 2015 to 2019 to a low of about 500 trees in 2019. And that, I just want to emphasize that that's not due to a decrease in effort or staffing. In 2019, we had full crews that really got out on their boots and were hiking all over the Pine Barrens looking for trees to cut. They cut every southern pine beetle tree, infested tree they could find. We only found about 500 that we could actually suppress. So, we have seen a decrease in the trend of southern pine beetle activity on Long Island over the course of this time. And that's definitely due to suppression of these large infestations, keeping the populations low, and then actively managing those smaller infestations. And that just, I want to emphasize, and we're going to talk about this throughout the presentations today, but, I'm glad everyone is on today, professionals as well as volunteers, in that this year, due to COVID and some of the restrictions that we have, is that we really are going to be limited in the amount that we're going to be able to get out and survey, and we have limited staffing this year. So, as more people are hiking throughout the Pine Barrens and enjoying the outdoors and getting some time out, if you see southern pine beetle, report it to us, put it in through IMAP, and that will really help us because we've got a lot less eyes on the ground this year than we have in previous years. So, that's a really important emphasis that we're really trying to let people know. And anyone joining this has been a real big help in that. So, all right, Nate, if you want to jump on to the next one. All right, so as Polly has kind of ran through our management goals here, we're looking to monitor southern pine beetle suppression where possible, and the goal in this is to protect these rare and susceptible ecosystems in Long Island. And we're also looking to restore these areas, and we've collected quite a bit of seed from pitch pine in Long Island. Our Saratoga Tree Nursery up north has been growing these pitch pines, and we've used them for reforestation efforts on the island. So we're replanting native pitch pine to Long Island throughout. And we're also working to increase the forest health and resilience in Long Island. It's a unmanaged system in many places, and due to the lack of fire that has been on the landscape in a number of years, the pitch pines are much denser than they have been in the past, making them much more susceptible to southern pine beetle, which decreases their resistance and increases the damage that they do. So we've been working on, this 4-tiered approach to managing southern pine beetle, not just looking at controlling and monitoring, but also trying to restore damaged ecosystems and increase the resilience of the forests on the island so they're better able to resist these types of threats. Next slide, Nate. And here are the tactics that we use, which Nate's going to talk about. So I'm just going to really breeze through this here. Is we look to control, so we use those aerial surveys, ground truthing, spot suppression. We cut those currently infested trees, leaving dead trees because the beetles have already evacuated those locations, and then some buffer trees around it to help prevent the spread of southern pine beetle to those healthy trees outside. And so, our activities have shown that this control really works, and luckily, southern pine beetle has been well studied in the southern United States, so we're able to adapt those methods to Long Island and really take a very quick and active approach to managing southern pine beetle. We also looked at prevention, which are the thinnings that we talked about, restorations, which are replantings, reintroducing fire to the ecosystems, and then supporting local communities that are looking to manage SPB and pine on their properties. And I will pass it over to Nate. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you, Brian. So a little of this is going to be rehashed, but I'm going to really drive this point home about signs and symptoms, since we want everybody out there looking for this year. As Bryan said, we're going to have a very reduced crew this year. It's just going to be Chris. So, everybody's eyes out there are going to be important. So running into the signs and symptoms here. Now, why isn't this going to the next slide? There we go. So first, as we've been talking about this aerial survey, this is a picture from Texas showing that this can really, really devastate an area in a very short amount of time. This is Connecticut, the aftermath forest. So here we're getting into, first, when you have an infestation, you're going to be hiking along and you're going to see these red pines. And these are the old, dead, formerly infested trees. This is the same picture. These are the old, dead, formerly infested trees. And then as you move this way, the infestation gets fresher. The infestation is actually freshest right here, where the trees are still green. And then, this is the active front, and it's moving in this direction. And as you get closer, you'll see these popcorn-sized pitch tubes here along the entire trunk. So then the beetles fly in and they overwhelm, mass attack the trees. Polly talked a lot about this. Stress trees give off volatiles that bring in the beetles. Then once the beetles get there, they start doing their beetle business and releasing their beetle pheromones. If you all watch Story of a Beetle, this is a quote from that by Matt Ayres. The southern pine beetle is a predator of pine trees. It hunts and kills trees, something like wolves hunt and kill moose, and that's very true. This is a dynamic infestation that is moving. So here we get some pictures of some crown discoloration. This is a golden crown. This is a red crown. Just those are the colloquial terms that we use when we're out there surveying. Here's the beetle in the pitch. Pitch tubes are going to look different depending on lighting conditions, depending on angles, but they're all relatively around popcorn size. They vary from red to white. They get harder with temperature. If the temperature is cold, pitch tubes will be fairly hard. If it's warmer, they'll be softer. This is some pictures of the galleries. More galleries. They are this S-shaped. By the time you're seeing these galleries, they're in dead trees. The bark just sloughs off of those dead trees. This is woodpeckering. This is also mostly in the stage 3 dead trees. This is the woodpeckers feeding on the larval SPB under the bark and their associate insects. This is the blue stain fungus that the southern pine beetle vectors, which was spoken about. This is what's going to be important for surveying, and this is what we want to know. The stages of tree decline. So we separate trees, infested trees into 3 different stages. Stage 1, which is fresh attack. This is when the needles are still green. We have stage 2, which is when the needles start to yellow. And we have stage 3, which is red needles. In stage 1, this is where you're going to find fresh pitch tubes. These pitch tubes are going to be nice and sticky. There might even be this beetle in here swimming, doing the old beetle stroke, the backstroke. You're going to find adult clarids on the bark. You're going to see boring dust potentially underneath the pitch tubes. So underneath the pitch tubes here, the beetle goes in and chews on wood, produces sawdust, it kicks the sawdust out, and it falls in crevices below the pitch tubes. And the crown is going to be green. Now in these stage 1 trees, these are the stages of life that you're going to find in an ideal stage 1 tree. You're going to see adult beetles. Those are going into the tree at this point in time. And they're going to be breeding, laying their eggs, and you're going to see these L1 and L2 stages of larval development. That just means L1 is larval 1, larval 2. And you're going to see these early instar larvas underneath the bark. So after this, it becomes the stage 2 tree. This is when the crowns start to turn gold. So these are not stage 2, but these golden crowns over here, these are stage 2 trees. You get in, the pitch tubes might be a little bit harder. And when you dig in, you're going to see new adults, and you're going to see, galleries and larvae and pupa within the bark. So as you dig in, you're going to see, if it gets to be a late stage 2, you might see some of these pupas becoming adults. But this is what we call a brood tree. This is the key tree to suppress, because this tree contains, beetles that are about to emerge. This tree is, about to exponentially increase the southern pine beetle population in that local area. It's going to hatch. And I lost my train of thought. So during this stage, this is when the tree dies. So the crown goes from green to yellow to red in fairly quick succession in that 4 to 6 week period during the summer. And, these beetles are in here feeding, and the crown doesn't necessarily know that its cambium is being chewed upon until after it's too late. So once the crown starts to go from that yellow into that red color, that's when we get to these stage 3 trees, and we have emergence. And emergence is what separates stage 2 from stage 3. When you look at the tree, do I have a picture of galleries? Yes. When you look at the tree and you see these emergence holes, these are the young adults that have just pupated leaving the tree. This tree is no longer alive. This tree no longer contains brood, and they've all left and moved on to the next tree. This is a very dynamic, very fast infestation. So these are signs of stage 3s. You got these red needles falling off. You have the exit holes. This is just some of the bark scraped away, so you can see the exit holes. And you might have beetles emerging. You have clarid larvae. So in stage 1 and stage 2, you might have clarid adults, but clarids come in later and lay their eggs as the trees, pass. And you'll have this ambrosia dust that can form at the bottom. This is from a different beetle that comes in after the tree dies, an ambrosia beetle. And that's white and can be all over the bottom. It's never that severe like snow, but you might see some white dust on it. And the bark is really loose from that blue stain fungus and those galleries. It has, it doesn't really attach on the bark. You can just grab onto it and pull it off. And why it's important is because we only do suppression on stage 2 and stage 1 trees. Because this is the only point in time where cutting the tree is actually effective in reducing southern pine beetle. And actually stage 1 trees are the most effective when cutting because they haven't had a lot of the reproduction yet. Once if you cut trees and larvae are in these later stages, they're going to have enough energy while the tree's on the ground to emerge and become adults. If you cut down the tree when they're in these stages, they may not have enough energy to complete their life cycle by the time the tree desiccates. And that's why this I kind of am hammering home this emergence to look for this, because this is important. You can still document an infestation with stage 3s, but this is what separates something that is effective to suppress and something that is, once those beetles have left, party's over and they're gone. So some lookalikes, turpentine beetles, these are, native, they are all over. We have noticed that they are kind of increasing a little bit in activity. Maybe that's because we have more people out there monitoring since, in the last 5 years since the Southern Pine Beetle program has started. But we're looking at turpentine beetle, and it says black turpentine beetle here, but Long Island has black and red turpentine, and they live, you know, together. You'll find them both under the bark if you get digging into the bark of these trees. So here's the black turpentine beetle. It's bigger. I think you saw this exact picture in Polly's presentation. All right, so monitoring. So, you know, so we get up there, we do the aerial surveys, and then we get on the ground and we go out there and we create these aerial polygons where we'll get in the air and we'll, you know, draw a circle around this and put this. This would be severe mortality. This would be the highest level. And then we get on the ground, identify it, flag it, and you know, this again would be survey. So we get on the ground, find a spot, and we get on the ground, survey it, and we put these smaller polygons within the aerial polygons. And within a 2-week period of time, hopefully we have enough time and we can get to all of them within 2 weeks of surveying to suppress, you know, all of those infested trees. And since 2017, we've actually done that model where, not the flight, but from ground survey to suppression has been 2 weeks since 2017. And since 2017 is when we've had really success in reducing, you know, the infestations within the pine barrens. This is again from earlier in the slide, in the presentation here, but that's just kind of what a spot looks like, and then we cut them down. Looks just like this. We go in, survey, find the infested trees, cut them. It is not always pretty, but we've had good success in the last 3 years. You know, this is an area out in Quag where we were unable to do suppression due to some issues with the land ownership there. In that same year, we were able to do some pretty extensive suppression over here in Henry's Hollow. And we saw, you know, a drastic reduction in the spread. And these are only, you know, a few miles apart there. Actually, this is almost set up to where this infestation's about that distance away. It's actually a little further, but this is just west of this one. So then restoration and the aftermath, you know, we've had some you know, the commission and the county have done planting events. We do cone collections. This is important to help maintain that genetic diversity of the pitch pine on Long Island. So we take these cones, we send them up to our nursery in Saratoga. They grow them into little seedlings like this. And then, you know, our partners and volunteers get out there and put them in the ground. So forest management. So we talked mostly about southern pine beetle. We haven't really talked about forest management. Yes, for southern pine beetle is here due to climate change and global and climate instability. And it's killing a lot of trees. One of the things that works extremely well in the south is thinning. So this is a picture from our thinning. Well, this was last spring and this was last summer. And we continued this operation in Sarnoff this fall. And we've thinned 75 acres or so in just our fall season. And the goal here is to then get prescribed fire back on the ground and create that, you know, pine barrens ecosystem. Get those rare herbaceous plants room to live, room back on the landscape, and really create that, you know, fire adapted pine barrens ecosystem that was traditionally here on Long Island. So I guess that's the end of my part. I can take questions now. Chris is going to do a screen share with his phone and, you know, show people how to use the technology. I can't see comments while I'm in screen share. So I'm going to stop my sharing.
So Nate, one of the questions that Jade had was, could you further discuss what the role of blue stain fungus is in the tree itself and the beetle?
Yes, blue stain fungus and the funguses that, I turned my camera on, and funguses that are vectored by southern pine beetle. So when that initial attack, so you have initial attack and then you have mass attack. When initial attack happens, those first pioneer adults inoculate that tree with a fungal pathogen that is quite aggressive, especially in pitch pine. And then, those adults enter the tree, they lay their eggs, and then when those eggs hatch, there's this freshly inoculated, fungal hyphae that is nutrient dense, nutrient packed, waiting there in the brood gallery for those young larvae when they hatch. So then the larvae hatch and they preferentially feed on the fungi because the fungi has its hyphae out there in the cambium, digesting that cambium, protein packing it, and it's right there in the larval gallery or in the brood gallery waiting for those young larvae when they come out. That being said, the southern pine beetle vectors white stain and blue stain, but you can't see white stain because it doesn't have pigment. And the white stain fungus is actually the preferred food of the larval of southern pine beetle.
So the blue stain fungus then is effectively a fungal disease that the southern pine beetle carries, that they pick up when they are in an infested tree, and they carry both the white food source and the blue stain fungus as well, and they inoculate both into each tree. Unfortunately, the blue stain fungus is antagonistic and will cause decimation not only to the tree, but also injure and reduce the southern pine beetle's efficacy.
Yeah, and the blue stain it's aggressive. It's a pathogen, and we found that even in trees that maybe weren't mass attacks, they were just initial attack with a few beetles, and there's not a significant density of pitch tubes, that the trees die anyways because they've been inoculated with the fungal pathogen. And you can kind of see this if you have a tree that died from southern pine beetle and there are pitch tubes, but there are no exit holes, you can assume that the beetle didn't have a successful brood. So the beetles lost the battle to the tree, and the tree's defenses, they weren't able to have a successful brood, but the tree lost the battle with the fungus.
There's two or three main applications we use when we record data for southern pine beetle. People who have permission to use our survey forms, survey 123 is our main application that we use to record data. So what you want to do here is, I'm going to sign out first just so everyone sees. You're going to go to the sign in page. It's going to look like this. And you're going to want to go down to enterprise login. And this is where you'll type in NYSDEC, and this will actually connect you to our DEC surveys. Mine auto logged me in, but at that point for everyone else, it would bring you to a login page where then at that point you would put in your email address and password that's associated with our DEC surveys. If you don't see this SPB survey / treatment version 2.0, what you could do is you can click in the top right, the little person avatar looking thing. You'll click download surveys. It's really simple. And then in the search bar, just type in SPB, and it should be one of the first ones that pops up right away. So you want to download that survey. After you download it, it should come back to my surveys on this main page. And the first thing I'll do when I get out in the field, I pick a spot with an aerial polygon that we touched about before. Once I get out there, I'll search that polygon, and if I come across either turpentine or southern pine beetle, we like to document all this information so we know exactly what's going on in these areas. So I'll open up this survey. I'll hit collect to start. This is where you start your survey. And the first page is just general information. This will be, the survey date and your name. This should come in automatically once you sign in, since your account is a link to it. So we'll go to the next page. This is our site information. we'll do right here, site name. You know, this could be a park name. It could be, you know, if it's, you know, like a street or just a town, if you don't really know where you are, just in general open land. So what we want to do is usually we'll be connected to like a GPS device, like a Garmin Glow. So when we get to a spot, you can click this top left icon, and this will actually get positions on satellites to kind of triangulate where you are in the field. And ideally what we would like is for this location accuracy to be 3 meters or less. You know, that way when we actually go out there to try and treat this area, we're not just kind of aimlessly walking around, you know, because you know, it's in meters, so 10 meters could be almost, I was at 30 feet. So, you know, we could kind of be searching for a little bit. So we try to get it as accurate as possible to make our jobs a little easier. This is just more information to go along with the site. Aerial polygon ID, like I said before, I'll choose a polygon in an area, and that will be the one I'm surveying for the day. So I'll just copy and paste that aerial polygon ID right into this bar right here. Super simple. And the land use, you know, it's all self-explanatory. Is it a forest? Is it a park? Is it an urban area? Or, you know, is it something other? So the next slide, you know, this is just more information as far as the site goes. Who owns the land? Is it the state? Is it the federal government? Is it the county? Usually this part right here for owner name, address, and phone number and stuff, I usually only ever fill this stuff out if it's someone's private property. This is just good in case we ever want to go back and check it. We have a lot of information on the person who owns the property, and we can get in contact with them fairly easily. So the next part, this is where we actually get into what we're seeing in the field. So all these polygons, sometimes they're kind of assumed that SPB is there. So when we kind of go in there and we don't find it, it's good that we mark down that we don't find SPB in this area. And so any other insect that we find, it's good to know that, oh, you know, this is what we're picking up from the sky. It's not SPB, but it's turpentine. Usually that's tend to be what we're seeing, or at least what I'm seeing out in the field recently, is a lot of these small pockets of trees end up just being just massive turpentine infestation. So this kind of clears up, you know, what we're seeing from the air, and just kind of gives us a better idea of what an actually SPB infestation might look like from the skies. Just more information here, pine species, you know, you can just check all that apply. Usually, you know, from my experience, it's mostly all pitch pine is what, you know, I've been seeing. Occasionally there might be a white pine or a spruce thrown in, but it's not very likely. So here are the stage counts. You know, like Nate and Bryan touched on these before. Stage 1 are those nice fresh infestations. So you can just hit the plus button and just count how many you see in this area. Stage 2, you know, we found 3, and stage 3 count, you know, just basically just gives you a total tree count. You can see on the bottom that's actually recording all the pluses or minuses that you do. It'll change as you go. So the basal area, this is just to give us an idea of how dense the area is that this infestation was found. So here we'll use crusoles or prisms, and you know, it'll kind of just give us a better idea of how dense this area is. So let's say I counted 12 trees, you know, we'll put the total in as, you know, 120 per acre, and then the basal area pine, there were only 9 pines. So it was just like, look like something like that. You know, that'll tell us that, you know, this area is fairly dense. It's mostly pines, and you know, maybe we should go check this out considering how dense it is. The front direction, this kind of leads to those pictures Nate was showing before. Usually it'll start an initial attack, and then it'll spread from that point. And this is where you'll just take the compass, which we can go over in the field this afternoon if we're able to get it out. And you know, the old saying, red in the shed, in the direction that the front is heading, and then you'll just put, you know, whatever degree comes up on the compass here. So this next part, number of trees marked, is a little different from total trees. If you remember from our tactics section, we cut all infested trees, but we also cut buffer trees as well. So this total number of trees, this would be the total number before, which we had 16. And let's say we marked, you know, 4 buffer trees around it for a total of 20 trees. So that would be this number here. So we know that it's infested and buffer is all in one number. Average class size, you know, this is pulpwood and saw timber. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think saw timber is considered anything over 8 or 9 inch DBH. You know, this is just kind of average size class. So if you're seeing large trees that, you know, you can get your hands around and give them a nice big hug, you know, just put saw timber. So it gives us a good idea. And notes, this is just, you know, anything, you know, you're seeing or you know, anything you think is any significant. Sometimes I just find one tree, so there's no front direction or anything like that. So I'll just put in this notes section that, oh, it was one tree, minimal SPB, maybe it has turpentine as well. You know, just kind of gives like a general idea of what you're seeing in the area. So section 5, this is where Collector comes into play. This is one of the other apps we use when recording data. So right here, the survey form is all our written information, but Collector is actually will give us that visual of how big a polygon or an infested area might be. So you'll click the link in the survey form and it'll bring you to this right here. So you're gonna wanna click SPB survey area. That'll bring you to the next point. And if you can see what I have highlighted, this top little map looking in the top of the page, you hit this one and it'll actually bring you to the map. And this gives you a lot better idea just looking at the ground. You can scroll around just like a regular map. And what's cool about Collector is you could actually make a polygon in a lot of different ways. I could just put points around, just make a nice quick polygon like that. If you click this arrow on the bottom that I have highlighted, it's undo. That'll get rid of the last point you made. You can go back from the beginning, or you could even just hit the garbage can and scrap the whole polygon right away. That's one way to do it. I suggest either hitting the stream button right here. This will basically, as you walk around, the phone and the satellites will kind of pick you up and it will make points every, I think it's 5 or 10 feet, depending how zoomed in you are and the scale you're using. And it'll actually make points for you as you walk around the infestation. Another thing you could do is if you hit this little icon on the bottom, it's my location. I have it highlighted right now. You can walk to a point, hit that button, and it'll drop a point for you. Walk to another point, hit it again, it'll drop the next point. And as you walk around the infestation, it'll slowly just build that polygon when you drop down points. So this is kind of what we do to get just, you know, for our maps and our visuals to see how big an infestation actually is. Usually we don't like to make polygons unless they're larger than, Nate, you might know this better than me. I forget what it is, a quarter of an acre or an acre in size. You know, we don't want to make
a tenth of an acre.
A tenth of an acre. Yeah, we don't want to make a polygon for one tree. But yeah, so, you know, this is kind of, you know, if you just see 1 or 2 trees, it's not really worth it to make a polygon because you'll have to be so far zoomed in that when we're actually zoomed out, looking at just the island in general, it might not even show up on the map that there's a polygon out there. Like you could see some of the ones over here, and like this is North Sea where we might head today. And this one, the bigger polygon right here, is actually 7 acres in size. But you can see once you zoom out a little bit how small it looks. So, you know, anything under a tenth of an acre is really not even going to register on our map. So once you make the polygon, let's zoom back to where I am. Oops. Once you make a polygon, you'll hit this plus in the top left, and this will basically attach it to that survey form that we started before. So at this point, you can close Collector, open back up survey 1, 2, 3, and it should go back to section 5. It doesn't say anything, but it is connected to the survey at this point. And after this, the next slide is just section 6. This is the treatment. This is mainly for, you know, Nate and I and whoever else is cutting when we do suppression. And this will be when we go back in and we actually cut down those trees, and we'll just record how many trees we cut. You know, there's a little more information here we can put down, the task, how long it takes, controls, just stuff like that. This is more information just for us that we fill out at the end when we're ready to complete this survey at the end of the year. So once you finish all this information, you just hit this plus icon in the bottom right that I have highlighted right here. And I have some information not filled out, but it'll basically give you options to either send now, send later, or, you know, you could, there's one other option to, I think, even just delete the whole survey. But usually I like to send it now right away. That way, you know, it gets to the office. If there's any problems, you know, as far as sending it, they can get back to me and I can work on it. Where sometimes if you do the send later, you might forget about it and realize maybe a week or two later that you have 5 or 6 surveys that you forgot to send, and then you just send them all at once. So I, you know, just me personally, I like to send them right away. I'm going to close out this one since it's just practice. So that is essentially survey 1, 2, 3 and collector as far as what we do, and anyone else that is approved to use our surveys. That's kind of the process you would go as far as recording data and submitting it goes. But for everyone else that is using IMAP, we'll go over that now. Well, the first thing you want to do for IMAP, I already have an account made, but it'll have you make an account, which is free. And if it doesn't do it when you're making your account, what you want to make sure you do before you really start recording any observation is in this top left, you see these 3 bar looking things. You want to click it and you want to actually go down to preferences. And this will kind of give you, this can narrow down your search of some of your species that you're looking for. So you can see the first part, my jurisdiction species list. I have it set for New York. So every pretty much known New York invasive species will only be on this list, and it won't have species from all across the country. My, you know, username and password, this would be personalized to you. Species name display, I like to do common names. If you prefer scientific or both, you can do them both. You could just do scientific. You know, this is really just your preference. All this stuff is kind of just to set it up the way you want. Your base map, you could do satellite, you could do road. Again, this is all preference, what you prefer. Measurement system, feet, acres is pretty standard to me. And you want to save all these settings right here. That way, for the next time that you log on to IMAP Invasive, all this stuff will be saved and ready for you to go right away. So once you have all these preferences set, you're out in the field, you know, you're hiking, you're walking the dog, walking the cat, whatever you're doing, and you come across SPB, take out your smartphone, your iPad, whatever you have on you at the time, open up IMAPs, and you want to hit, in the top right, you see plus add observation. And this is where you're going to open up a survey form to be able to record data and submit it to IMAP. And the first thing you see right when you open up, take a photo using your camera. And this I highly recommend people doing. This is best for us. If you take a picture, we might even be able to determine what it is just by looking at the picture before we even get out there. Or we can determine that it's not what we're looking for. And it kind of just saves us time. So we're not going out to every single point, you know, and just constantly seeing turpentine or, you know, something that's not SPB. So the next part, once you take that picture, I'm pretty sure with IMAP, and you know, this is a little flawed in my opinion, you can only submit 1 picture per form. I've tried this in the past to do multiple ones, and it only just picks the last one that you take. So you only got 1, so try your best to make it count. And that's kind of the best we can do with what we're given right now as far as IMAP goes. The species, you know, this is probably the most important part. You know, you can see this whole list of, you know, all these different invasive species. But for our sake, we're going to scroll all the way down to S for southern pine beetle. Here we go. And for this case, we'll say we detected this species. I guess species not detected. If turpentine is an option, you can maybe just include that in the notes part at the bottom. There was a question earlier about where to put what stages you were seeing for IMAP. And this is kind of really what we're given with as far as their forms go. You can put a total number of plants affected count. This could be that total number of infested trees that you're counting. Maybe add up all those stages and put that number in here. And if you wanted to break it down, you could do it in the comments, you know, stage 1, we saw 7, you know, just throw a dash in there or something like that, and break them down like that way, you know, and that'd be extremely helpful for us. You can see usually when you first open up IMAP, it'll ask you to, use your location. You should have an option to be able to allow you to track you when you're only using the app. So it's not just killing your battery, tracking you even when you're not using the app. So this should be fairly accurate when you are out in the field, or, it makes it even better if you have a Garmin Glow GPS device connected to your phone. And it's pretty self-explanatory for the most part. Time searched, if you want to put that in, by all means. IMAP 3 project. Not even going to lie, I don't even know what any of that stuff is because there's not any options for it. So I would just say leave that stuff blank because it's optional. Really what we're just looking for with IMAP is it southern pine beetle? Did you detect it? And if you could give us a photo to go along with it, that'd be really helpful for us to determine it. And then again, total infected that you counted. If you want to break it down even further, or just say, one tree, maybe it has SPB and turpentine, whatever you think is relevant or you think that might help us in determining what it is, by all means, put it in. And then you're going to save it, and then you can see it submits right away. And yeah, that's pretty much it as far as recording data. And if you guys have any questions or, concerns or anything like that, I recommend coming out to the field session. We can get you guys actually using them out in the field and applying what you just learned to what you're seeing, and, possibly be able to see if if you picked up the right information that we're looking for as far as southern pine beetle information goes. But other than that, if you guys have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Hey, Chris, I was wondering if giving more specific for IMAP, especially a picture that you might be looking for, or information as far as, do you want pictures of the pitch tubes? Do you want some sort of scale associated, like how we'd put our fingernail in an association with the pitch tube? Any additional descriptors that you think would be helpful?
I mean, the pitch tubes would definitely be nice. And putting your thumb for scale next to it is always helpful as well. Like we touched about earlier, one of the main differences between turpentine and SPB are the size of the pitch tubes. So if you're not sure if it's SPB or turpentine, sometimes turpentine goes a little higher up in the tree than what you would normally see. If you think the pitch tube is best, I mean, it's kind of up to the person's discretion, I guess. I mean, Nate and Bryan, if you guys think there's a certain thing, you would rather them take a picture of, please speak up. But yeah, I would say the pitch tubes maybe, because usually just a yellowing crown, it could be some other disease or some other pest that is just possibly killing that pine. The pitch tubes are really kind of what tells us that it's, some type of boring beetle that's in it. So that would be my suggestion, would be for those pitch tubes.
All right.
I'm wondering if you're unsure of exactly what it is, we, rather than using the ARC submission, should we just use IMAP invasives because we can submit a photo and it'll be easier for you guys to kind of weed that out?
Yeah, I mean, if you have access to use our survey forms, I would say to use them, just because, they come right to us right away, whereas IMAP is kind of a separate third party, I guess. We might be able to add a photo section to the survey form. There actually might be one in there already. I might have just skipped over. But yeah, I would say if you could use the survey 123 form, that would definitely be the best way for you to submit that information, because when we go back to that point, we have to finish that survey form as well. Usually IMAP is really just for everyone that doesn't have access to those survey forms.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Oop, I just want to
Awesome.
jump in, Polly, really quickly here. Brian Ellis here. We do get the IMAP. So if you put something into IMAP as a volunteer or someone out there, we at DEC will get that very quickly. We have, we'll get live data from that. So, and be able to approve or deny it. So, as many pictures as you guys can provide are great. We went over that. Showing scale, showing a little zoomed out is always good, so we can get kind of a view of, where those pitch tubes are on the tree, is always a good thing to show. But, it's not like it's going to take us days and days for us to get those IMAP confirmations. So I just want to reinforce that.
For clarity too, though, so the IMAP Invasives is going to identify, it's trying to be encouraged to be used as a tool to document invasive species and more readily southern pine beetle by the public. And then the priority for the state for suppression is within the Pine Barrens core, and then the compatible growth area, and then other public lands. So while the public may be mapping southern pine beetle on private properties, which is great, and it gives us an idea of where the beetle is and actively infested, the state response is not able to respond to those private infestations. So it'll give us an idea of the infestations and the patterns and where it's spreading, but the state and the commission aren't able to do, tree removals or suppression activities on private lands generally.
Great, that's good points, Polly. And then just to follow up on what Bill asked here, is DEC employees and partners who are like people at the Pine Barrens Commission, or I'm not sure if people at the PRISM can get those survey forms, the survey 123 forms. So we'll have to follow up on that. You have to have access to ArcGIS Online is one of the requirements. So, but everyone could, IMAP is free and to use. So if you don't have access to those forms, and it is somewhat limited, who does, the IMAP forms are probably the best way for reporting to happen.
And also on IMAP Invasives, if you have a series of pictures, I believe if you bring those pictures back and you can use the online web access to upload multiple pictures as well. And you can go on to IMAP Invasives New York and create an account there, and you can, come back. If you take a number of pictures in the field and you have the GPS location, you can fill all that in on the web-based browser access rather than on your phone if you want to provide more supplemental photos as well. The benefit of doing it in the field with the app is while you can only do one picture, then it's automatically geo-referenced. I believe if you have your geo-referencing on your phone when you take the picture, when you upload those pictures, they'll also be geo-referenced into the online application. So that can also be an easier way of making sure the geo-reference is associated with the photos, and then you don't have to go in and actually zoom in and pinpoint exactly where the infestation is.